Well, hello everybody. Hope everybody's having a great day, and welcome and thanks for joining in for our first ever live stream. And I can see from the side there we've got people from all over the place. It's great to see that as well. I can see questions have already come in, and we're going to be answering those as well. But I've got a couple of different things I want to go over before we get started here. You know, we'd planned on doing this live stream, of course, over a month ago now, and of course, so you know, Charlie Kirk, the assassination had not taken place yet, obviously, and you know, I've just been thinking about how different everything feels now, how separated everything feels now, and I've been using an analogy for several years now as to what I'd seen happening in society and in general. And it was like, it seemed like people were sitting in the same movie theater and they were looking at the same screen and they were seeing two completely different movies. And then the frustration seemed to come in when they'd look at each other, and because they were experiencing different things, it was like, well, did you see what she just said? No, she didn't say that. He said this. And the different almost realities they were experiencing just grew to so much frustration. And of course, that's kind of been highlighted now in society where, you know, on one hand, you see people mourning and grieving for a young father who was brutally murdered. And then on the other side, you've got a group of people that figuratively are dancing on the man's grave and seemingly just so callous. It's pretty shocking, to be honest. But, and I know there's probably going to be people tuning in here, tune into our channel, and they're kind of on the other side so far that, you know, you can just see that they're not open to any kind of dialogue or anything like that. It doesn't matter what you say, it's just they're all automatically diametrically opposed. It's kind of like watching the pregnant ladies pop Tylenol because orange man bad, I guess. But I think there are people that do want a dialogue and, you know, at least see what the other person's point of view is. And so I got to thinking that this duality people are experiencing, you know, it's kind of like that duck and the rabbit picture. If you've ever seen one of these, they're called a bleak, right? You can see it two different ways. And some people say, well, no, that's a duck. And some people say, no, that's a rabbit. But you kind of have to coax them into seeing it your way, so to speak. And I think as far as the creation evolution debate, one of the biggest challenges I see that I've seen many times over the years, and I think it was a big thing for me to see coming from a rather atheistic worldview, and becoming a Christian, was being able to differentiate between the two types of sciences that there are. And there is two types of science, and sometimes you have to illustrate that for people, and I'm going to demonstrate that here shortly if my kettle boils. But you know, it's not just creationists that have been saying this. Evolutionists have admitted it for a long time. There's a big difference between repeatable, observable, operational science, something where you can set up an experiment in a lab and repeat it over and over again and always get the same results. And historical science, where you're looking at things in the present, trying to figure out how they came to be that way. And so you have to come up with a story to explain it. And I'll give you an example here. Here's a famous evolutionist, Ernst Mayr, and he said, evolutionary biology, in contrast with physics and chemistry, is a historical science. The evolutionist attempts to explain events and processes that have already taken place. You can't set up an experiment in a lab showing me ape-like creatures turning into people. If you believe that has happened, you believe it on faith, perhaps based on some evidence that you've been shown, a series of skulls, and somebody said, well, we believe this one turned into that one, and we think this one turned into that one, but you can't repeat the experiment over and over again. He went on and said, laws and experiments are inappropriate techniques for the explication of such events and processes. Instead, one constructs a historical narrative, a story consisting of a tentative reconstruction of the particular scenario that led to the events one is trying to explain. And that's exactly what's happening here. Now, as a biblical creationist, I believe God's word is true, that I can trust the word of God from beginning to end, as plainly written. Didn't always think that way. Understand that there are many people that don't think that way. So we'll get into all those things, but I wanted to preface, as we began here, for those that are really, you know, working through these issues and things like that, to consider that There's no science denying happening here with the biblical creationists, okay? What we're denying is evolutionary interpretations of the same facts that we can all see. So we will get to your questions. I can see that there was some came in quite early, I think from the UK, and we will get to those right away. If you want to get to the top of the pile there, of course, you can super chat, but we will also be taking other questions that come in. I also wanted to give a bit of an introduction for myself, and for many of you who wouldn't really know my background and how the ministry here in Canada got started, and talk about some of our video production and stuff like that before we get into questions. But many of you might know I grew up in a very atheistic type worldview. My parents were not Christians. Came to Christ around 26, and then really the creation evolution issue was a huge issue for me to overcome. Growing up, whenever I was approached by Christians or someone trying to give some kind of religious view, that's the way I looked at it, I was very dismissive. I just thought, well, I already know where I came from, pond scum billions of years ago, so going to your Bible study or your church, that wasn't really interesting to me at all. And it wasn't until I finally got invited to hear a man speak, I knew him casually from business, and I respected him, and he was preaching at some non-denominational Sunday service. And I decided to go, and I had a clipboard when I showed up, and I was expecting him to just shout out Bible verses and pound the pulpit or something. Whatever I'd seen on TV, by Christian TV, that's what I'd kind of pictured church was like, because I'd never gone to church. And he did a very good job of debunking evolution, which I'd never heard anybody do before. I just considered it fact and science, and that was it. He'd read Origin of Species. He had a medical background. I respected him. So I didn't get saved. But it really shook my belief in evolution, because I could follow an argument and I could see that there were holes when they were pointed out. And so over the course of the next year, I started to really think things through a little bit more. I mean, if evolution's not a fact, what's the only option? Well, it's a creator. It's God. And I think Hebrews 11:6 describes it very well, where it says, those who come to him must come to him by faith, but must believe he exists and that he's a rewarder. And so a year later, I got invited to hear the same man preach again. And this time I was a little more open to it. And I showed up, and again, he did some apologetics. But apologetics doesn't save anybody, okay? It's the gospel that saves people. And so he started talking about God and God's law. And I just came under conviction because I realized I have broken God's law, and I was in rebellion to him. And so he used an interesting analogy that I've used ever since. Probably not proper theology, and some of you might tackle me here as I say this, but it was something I could comprehend at the state I was. And he used the analogy of an invisible camera coming into being the day you're born. And it records everything you do and everything you say and how you say it and how you act and all those things you do that you don't think anybody's around. And when you die, you stand there in front of God. And I was taking it personally by this point. And it was like God was standing there saying, hey, Cal, let's sit down on this warm, comfy couch here, and we're going to play the DVD of your life and see if you're good enough to be with me in eternity. And I remember just sitting there, my palms were sweating, and I was like, I wouldn't have wanted to do that with my mom, let alone the God of the universe. And he said, but see, if you're a Christian at that point, it's like Jesus comes along at that point and says, no, Father, don't judge him on his life. Play my DVD instead and base your judgment on my life, the perfect, sinless Son of God. And that was the first time I understood who Jesus was, what his mission was, why he'd come. Up to that point, Jesus was just a swear word in my vocabulary. And so I got saved and eventually started going to church, and eventually started to see how the whole creation evolution debate was affecting many of the young people in the church that I was attending. And so I realized it wasn't just me. It eventually led me on a road to where I am today as an apologist. And so that's my history. Now, the ministry here, I was working for another creation apologetics ministry for many, many years, and about 9 years ago, the Answers in Genesis ministry wanted to have a presence here in Canada, and so I met with a team down there, and the ministry got started. And then, of course, COVID hit, and I couldn't go around and do conferences like I normally do or speak at churches. And so we started doing video production right away, because I realized if we didn't do something to be able to keep, outreach going, then we get shut down pretty hard. And so it was a good thing that we did, very providential. And then we've got a great team today. There's two fellas working with me in behind the scenes here, Drew and Isaac, and they are phenomenal, helping with all the setup and the filming and the editing, just brilliant. I do the writing, of course, and the yakking, but they do a great job. So feel free to shout out and give them a compliment, because they sure do a great job. So I just wanted to give that bit of a background here, and I've got some other topics I'm going to be covering, but I thought, well, let's start in with some of your chats here. So Paul James, he wrote in earlier, and he was wondering if we could discuss Neanderthals, and he had another topic he wanted to cover as well. Starlight and time. Yeah, that's a big one. Okay. And then there was someone else that wanted, it was a skeptic actually, and he wanted me to talk about human origins. So I thought, well, why don't I just tackle both of those together? And so this is for you, Paul, and another fellow, I can't see it here, but he'll probably know who he is when I start talking about it. So let's go through some things here about human origins and Neanderthals and things like that. Let me bring this up. The skeptical fellow there was really wondering, why it is that, the way he put it, I was denying the geologic record and the evidence for human evolution. Well, I can tell you how I grew up and what I'd got taught when being the age that I am. Is growing up, these are the types of books that I would read in schools, and they would teach me that there were these proto-human-like creatures, ape men, so to speak, that evolved and branched out and became different races of people. So that's where the supposed Caucasians and Mongoloids and Negroids and Australoids, etc., came from. That's my framework growing up. But I want you to think about it, because when he's talking about, well, why are you denying the evidence of evolution? What are we really finding? We're finding some skulls, and really what an evolutionist is trying to do is find the most ape-like human skull and the most human-like ape skull and say that there's been some kind of transition there. But I want to show you something. Look at the skull here on the screen. What is that? Probably pretty easy to guess, right? It's a dog. Okay. Let's try this. What's that? Oh, it's a dog. Different type of dog, littler dog, yappy dog. What's that? You probably can't get fooled the third time it's a dog. It's a bulldog. But you can see there's a lot of differences there, and they're the same creature. And so, as I was mentioning, whether you're talking about a modern human skull or you talk about a Neanderthal or a Cro-Magnon, really you're just seeing variations amongst the kind of people that we see today. And you can see the differences in apes and monkeys and things like that as well. And of course, interpretation comes into play. I mean, look at the skull on the screen there. You might look at that, and let's say we'd never known about this creature and you just found its skull, and you look at it and you see those big long fangs, and you might come up with some imaginative story, like perhaps when it was alive it went around and, was deadly hunter and punctured things with its teeth and etc. But it's actually a Chinese water deer. It's just a deer. And it digs up roots and stuff like that with those big fangs, but that's all it does. So I want you to think about the variation we see in all living things, whether it's dogs or whether it's people. There's Robert Wadlow, tallest man we've ever had on film or camera. And there he is with his family, and there he is, a statue of him in Niagara Falls, so you can get your picture taken with him. But here's the smallest woman we've ever seen on camera. This is Lucia Zarate. She was 26.5 inches high, and she was very proportionate, right? But fully human. So all sorts of variation within the kind. And so when we hear about these so-called stories, like for example, Neanderthal man. When I was growing up, Neanderthal man was pictured as very brutish and primitive and ape-like, etc. And today, Neanderthals have kind of been given a big rework, so to speak. I mean, today the way they're depicting them kind of looks like Metallica. I don't know. There's some more modern depictions of Neanderthal children and women. Here's one. It says, this is from BBC News. It says, scientists construct the most accurate model of a Neanderthal yet, and he looks just like Chuck Norris. Now, many ladies would consider Chuck handsome. And so, yeah, the way we depict Neanderthals today is very, very different than the way I grew up learning about these, as these brutish, ape-like creatures. As a matter of fact, Science Daily had an article that said, if you think Neanderthals were stupid and primitive, it's time to think again. The widely held notion that Neanderthals were dim-witted and that their inferior intelligence allowed them to be driven to extinction by the much brighter ancestors of modern humans is not supported by scientific evidence. I definitely believe our research suggests Neanderthals were highly capable, intelligent, likely, friendly beings. We really need to rewrite the history books about their caveman-like behaviors. They were very human-like behaviors. Well, of course they were. As a matter of fact, the designation is Homo Neanderthals, which means human. And so when someone says, well, I got tested genetically and I have Neanderthal DNA, what exactly does that mean? I mean, I could tell you that I'm Germanic, okay? How could I tell you that? Well, there's probably certain DNA markers that if I had my genetics tested, they would say, okay, you probably came from a certain people group near Germany at a certain point in time. Well, that's exactly the same as how they would describe Neanderthals. They're just people with certain genetic markers. And so the only distinguishing factor when you hear an evolutionist talk about Neanderthals is they assign them greater ages than modern humans today. But that's an assumption. They're just people. I don't know if we've ever seen the heavyweight boxer Nikolai Valuev. He is a massive, massive dude. Just look and Google him on and check him out. He's just this massive guy. And if you look at some of his features, and I'm not denigrating the man, he's a brilliant guy, has a lovely family, wife, etc. But look at that brow line. Very similar to how, most people depict Neanderthals. Most people would say he has Neanderthal features. And of course, when he's doing promotions for boxing and stuff like that, they've got him shaving with an axe to kind of, beef up that whole ape-man appearance. There's a picture of him with Evander Holyfield. Evander's a pretty big guy, but Nikolai's quite bigger. So the fact is, there's people all over the world with these genetic markers. You could say someone was, like I said, Germanic or Asiatic or whatever. But they're just a people group with similar, genetics. Think of like a Samoan wrestler. You ever see a Samoan wrestler? Man, some of those boys are large, right? Big guys. They have that, big body type and a lot of muscle mass and stuff from that certain region on the planet. That's all it is, just variations. And of course, one of the reasons why I'm so skeptical of the evolutionary interpretation, besides the fact that the scripture doesn't work with scripture whatsoever, is some of the fraudulent things we've seen. Things like Piltdown Man. I know evolutionists get sick of us mentioning this, but from 1912 to 1953, for 40 years, they would make models of this skull and send them to universities and museums all over the planet, touting this as proof positive of our evolutionary ape-like ancestry. And then they retested it in 1953 and found it was an ape skull and a human jaw. No, sorry, it's the other way around. Human skull with an ape-like jaw, and it had been filed down and fitted together. Now, again, evolutionists hate us bringing that up because they're like, yeah, we've heard about that for so long. Who cares about that now? Well, here's what I care about. If for 40 years your best scientists couldn't detect that bad a fraud, they're either pathetic scientists or they had an agenda. That's why I keep bringing it up. And of course, we've seen things like Nebraska Man, 1922. This man found this tooth and he came up with this story, and here's a picture of the so-called depictions of these creatures because of this tooth. And then they found out, of course, it was an ape tooth. Had nothing to do with humans or apes. It had everything to do with evolutionary presuppositions. And we can work that way all the way up to Lucy, for example, where you would go to museums and you would see Lucy depicted with human feet and human hands, etc. And of course, when they found Lucy, they didn't find her feet. And so they've found many more Australopithecines now. Guess what types of feet they have? Ape feet. But they depicted them as walking upright, human feet, etc. So there's lots of reasons to doubt these evolutionary interpretations. What I've found is the fact that most people just have this trust for the expert, the tyranny of the expert, so to speak. That's why I get people commenting, well, you're not a scientist. Yeah, but I can follow an argument and I can read a science paper just like anybody else. I don't think you need to be an expert to have an opinion on these things. I guess my water boiled here. I should do my experiment because I do want to show you the difference between operational and historical science. So we're just going to see what water boils here at. We're about 270 meters above sea level here near London, Ontario. But let's continue. See, there's been lots of times where the so-called experts have given us information and it just gets repeated over and over again, and it turns out not to be true. For example, Haeckel's embryo drawings. These were made by Ernst Haeckel in the 1800s. He came up with the theory of recapitulation, where he proposed that inside the woman's womb, as the fetus was developing, they recapitulated their evolutionary ancestry. So it started a little bit like a worm, and then you were kind of like a fish, and then you were kind of like an ape, and then you finally became a person, which of course is in total hogwash, and that was thrown away. But then these embryo drawings got put into textbooks. As a matter of fact, my youngest daughter, in Guelph, Ontario, just about 20 years ago, had a copy of Haeckel's drawings in her textbooks, even though they knew they were fraudulent from the beginning in the 1800s. But they got put in, and this just got repeated over and over again. Here's 1969. This is Dr. Spock. He's the guy that's supposed to tell us how to look after our kids. And he said, each child as he develops is retracing the whole history of mankind, physically and spiritually, step by step. A baby starts off in the womb as a single tiny cell, just the way the first living thing appeared in the ocean. Weeks later, as he lies in the amniotic fluid of the womb, he has gills like a fish. That is completely false. You never have gills like a fish. See, a man named Michael Richardson, geneticist, he actually did a comparison in the 90s and compared Haeckel's drawings to the actual creatures at the same stage of development and proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that this was complete bunk. And he said, this is one of the worst cases of scientific fraud. It's shocking that somebody once thought was a great scientist was deliberately misleading. It makes me angry. What Haeckel did was to take a human embryo and copy it. These are fakes. And the fakes continue, or at least the false information. Things like, for example, this was in 2009, long after they knew that chimp DNA similarity was not 99%. But this book was on sale at the British Museum of Natural History and said that we are 99% similar to chimps in our DNA. As a matter of fact, here's some signs from the Melbourne Museum in Australia, 99%. Too close for comfort? Believe it or not, our DNA is nearly identical to a chimpanzee's. Less than 2% of our DNA differs from theirs. These tiny differences in DNA have caused large differences in appearance and behavior, but our DNA reminds us of how closely related we really are. Related to what? Animals. We're not humans. We're basically the same. The other sign says, DNA studies have altered our view of human evolution. They show that humans are apes. There is no missing link. Well, check out Nature Magazine 2025. This article, we're down to 86% similarity now. As a matter of fact, I actually checked, and cats are supposed to have more DNA similarity now than chimps do. So if this theory that the closer related we are in DNA similarity to the creature, we should have evolved from cats instead of chimps, according to the data. So I'll leave it there, but hopefully that answers both questions, and I'll get back to the distant starlight one in a moment here. Let's see how many more questions we have. Super chats that I need to look at. And I may have to ask for some help from my tech guys here. But well, let's dig into that whole distant starlight argument here for a second. See if I can pop something up here for you. Because this is probably one of the trickier questions that we get asked to deal with. No, that wasn't it. Let me see. There we go. And so we'll try to walk through this. So the argument from the skeptic is, look, you've got a distant starlight problem, creationists. You're telling us that the Earth is only 6,000 years old, but you've got light coming from stars that are billions of light years away, so it can't possibly be true. And actually, this argument has caused many Christians to abandon the concept of young Earth creationism. Okay. By the way, let me just check this here. Yep, came out perfect, about 99 degrees Celsius. And that's exactly what it should come out here where we are, 270 meters above sea level. And what I'm doing this for, obviously, is to show you the difference. See, if I was in Halifax and did the same experiment, it'd come out to be 100 degrees because we'd be at sea level, right? And that's an experiment that any of you can do. And it doesn't matter whether you're a Hindu or an atheist or a Muslim or a Christian, doesn't matter. You're always going to get the same result if you have the same conditions. That's empirical science. But I'm going to show you that this whole creation evolution debate is not the same type of science that we're discussing here. We've already touched on some of the quotes. Now, whenever somebody asks me about the distant starlight problem, supposedly that creationists have, one of the things I try to do, and it's actually a logical fallacy in one sense, the two-coke argument. Well, you have the same problem. And it's only a logical fallacy if you then don't have an explanation. But the reason I'm going to show you this is because Big Bang theorists also have a distant starlight problem. So it's not just a young Earth creationist problem. Okay, so everybody's trying to figure out some solutions here. Now, Dr. Danny Faulkner, who is an astronomer on board, he's a PhD with the AIG US ministry. I encourage you to go look up some of his articles. He's got a theory about how to explain it. I'm going to give a different one here just to show you there are several biblical creationist cosmologies that are attempting to solve this problem. But I just want to show you the secular version of the problem. You see, if we're standing at this on Earth and we're looking out in one direction, okay? Let's say 57 billion light years in one direction and then 57 billion light years in the other direction, then you can look across the galaxy at about 94 billion light years across, okay? But the challenge for the Big Bangers is they say that the universe is about 14 billion years old. But there's an energy signature in space, the cosmic microwave background, which is basically at the same temperature right now. Now, the only way that could be is that if energy had shared across the universe for long enough to make it the same temperature. And if you don't really know what I mean, let's say I took a metal bar and I superheated this end and I froze this end. Eventually, heat to cold, the entire thing would come down and be one temperature, okay? So the challenge for the Big Bang theorists is how do you possibly get, light energy to share 94 billion light years across in only 14 billion years? Of course, they've come up with ad hoc theories like expansion theory, where the universe was supposed to go from, this singularity out to a certain point, and energy was shared, and then it is slowly, gradually, come out, and then now it's supposedly even accelerating. And some of these ideas are so weak that even many evolutionists and evolutionary thinking cosmologists are starting to abandon the Big Bang and these types of ad hoc explanations. I remember in the 80s, there was some creationists trying to explain this, and they were saying that perhaps light traveled quicker in the past. And of course, they were mocked and so on. Because it does appear like light travels at the same speed. But I just thought it was quite interesting then that this evolutionary thinking cosmologist, just released he released a book several years ago called Faster Than the Speed of Light, trying to use the same argument, okay? So, as I mentioned, there are many different ways creationists have tried to explain this. I'll just give you one. It has to do with time dilation. And the fact is that we think that light travels at the same speed, but one thing we know doesn't travel at the same speed is time. And that's not just theoretical, that's something we can test with atomic clocks, etc. So time is affected by gravity, it's affected by velocity, it's affected by the warping of space, etc. You can check this out actually just by using your GPS. Well, the GPS is pinging signals down to your receiver on your phone if you've got the GPS connected. And so there's a couple of things going on here because these satellites are about 20,000 kilometers away from Earth, which means the gravity is not as intense. And so that adds about plus 43 microseconds a day. Of course, they're traveling at a velocity of 12,000 kilometers per hour, which minuses 5 microseconds a day. And it gives a net result that, of course, time is traveling at a different speed there to here. And if they didn't make these adjustments in calculations, you'd be about, I think, 400 meters off course every hour because of this challenge. So some creationists have said, okay, perhaps it's time, the warping of space. Perhaps when God says he stretched out the heavens, you could literally have your 6-day, 6,000-year-old Earth here, and you could have greater amounts of time at the edge of the universe, just like you could have time going slower here but quicker up there where the satellites are, but just exponentially larger. So it gets to be pretty heady, to be honest. And I'm not a math guy, and it's just a really super basic explanation. So if you're into this stuff, you're into cosmology, you're into astronomy, you're into mathematics and physics and all that stuff, you can go to the Answers in Genesis website and see all sorts of different ideas posited there. Check out Danny Faulkner's as well, as we would point you to there first, of course. But it's not as if creationists haven't thought this through, and it isn't as if evolutionists don't have the same problem. And their solutions are, like I said, it's pretty theoretical, not based on things like we know, things like time dilation, etc. So I'll leave that there, and then I'll search for some more of your questions, and then we can move on a bit here. Let me just pop this up. You can tell this is my first time. Let's see, do we have any more super chats? I think we do. Let's see. This is Anthony. Thank you, Anthony, for your super chat for $10. He says, "Thank you for your amazing presentations, Calvin. I was a non-believer and atheist debater for over 30 years after coming across the Elton anomaly. Bless you." Oh, I'm not even sure what that is, brother. So let me know. But appreciate your super chat. And then KJV Bible Stories gave us $5, and appreciate that as well. Don't see a question tagged onto that, so I'll just leave that there. Well, I'll wait for some more questions here and just move on. I've got another topic I wanted to talk to you about, and that was, of course, our AI videos that we did, our Talk with Grok and Chat with Chad and so on. And there will be more of those, by the way. We recorded several at the time. Of course, I didn't want to just keep releasing them over and over again. I kind of wanted to give you a sampling of the Grok experience and then Chats with Chad. But we'll be releasing one of those AI videos probably once every 3 or 4 weeks, just to, keep the interest up and so on. But it was amazing to see the response from many people. I've been contacted by so many people out there, perhaps just because they hadn't done any homework with AIs, and Christians really trying to understand what exactly AIs are and all this stuff. We even had one person contact us and talk about their experience trying to share the gospel with an AI. And I was like, wow, you're talking to a bot, okay? These things are not intelligent. Some people saying, oh, you convinced ChatGPT that God exists. It's like, well, convinced. Number one, it's not a human, so you don't convince it. In that conversation, it concluded right? Some things through logic, math, and science. But of course, you can restart it, and a different person's not gonna find the same results. So just to tell you how that series came about, I just wanted to learn more about AIs, and I was fooling around with them and was kind of frustrated at some of the results I was getting because I knew the answers to the questions I would often ask, and I would get incorrect information. But when I asked the AI specifically, then it would say, oh, well, yeah, that's right. And it would cite different studies that I already knew about, and then it, in a sense, changed its mind. And so after a while, that's where I came up with the parameters for asking it questions, to stick to strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science. And of course, that's where many of the criticisms come in, and I'll read you some of them. Some of them are quite funny. But in doing so, that focuses the AI to because really what it's doing is it's just pulling from data that's been inputted into it. And by the way, it's not, not every AI is, pulling from the same database, so to speak. But anyway, these things are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming more common. And really the catalyst for why I did that series is we received an email from a young lady. And she said, hey, I was recommended this Christian apologetics resource. And so I asked ChatGPT what it thought. And then she listed, gave the readout of the hit piece that ChatGPT had given to this particular resource. And then she concluded, well, if ChatGPT can shoot this down so easily, why should I even take the time to read it? And, I just thought to myself, really? That's your level of trust in an authority figure. And see, this is what Answers in Genesis has been saying for years. See, it used to just be your local school system. It was just like me growing up. I was the learnee and they were the learned. And so when they told me that fossils got laid down by sediments that got laid down, 1 or 2 varves per year and slowly built up, and I was just a kid and, oh yeah, it makes sense to me. I wasn't even thinking through what they were telling me. I just wanted to go play. They started putting all these ideas into my head, evolutionary ideas, dinosaurs evolved into birds and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff, because I was putting my faith in what they were teaching. They taught me 2 + 2 = 4. Well, why wouldn't I believe that dinosaurs evolved into birds? I wasn't making the differentiation, you know what I mean? If they're teaching me reading, writing, and arithmetic, and then evolution, why must all be factual, must all be true, must all be repeatable, etc. And so that got me thinking, wow, there's probably a lot of people putting their trust in the authority of these chatbots. And so that's kind of how that all started. So I'll read you one of the criticisms here. It said, Calvin will limit it to only pulling its responses from the Bible. Will that impress you? That's the equivalent of what he did here. He eliminated about 80% of all science from Grok's responses. Now that was the first Talk with Grok video we did. And I thought that was pretty funny. Now, later on, because I responded, I said, yeah, if you remove logic, math, and what we can observe in science, you end up with evolution. Some of the criticisms came when it says it's limiting Grok to about 10 to 20% of science. And the criticisms that came in is because I would say to it, as part of my parameters, avoid giving me consensus science answers unless they conform to strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science. And that's where many of the criticism came in and said, oh, he's limiting these AIs because he's saying not to spout consensus science. Here's another one. If I ask you to, it's saying it to the AI, if I ask you to remove scientific consensus from your possible sources of information, would your answers be skewed? And ChatGPT said yes. Well, of course. But that's not what I asked it. I said not to give me consensus science answers unless they conform to strict logic, mathematical probability, and what we can observe in science. Not all the narratives, the stories. Remember the quotes I read to you at first? The tentative reconstruction of what we think might have happened in the past, but we didn't observe it, and you sure can't test it like you can try to test what water boils at sea level or whatever level you know of. So it was pretty funny to look through here. And really, that was the only criticism that showed up over and over and again. They're saying, well, you programmed it to say what you wanted it to say. Folks, some of the criticisms we received from the videos, and I agree. I was worried that you guys would be frustrated just watching it, because I was like, how exciting is it going to be to watch some guy talk to his phone and get a response? And I didn't want there to be any editing, because then I thought, well, people are going to accuse us of, if the camera, usually we have a 2-shot camera shot, and if we shift the camera angle, they're going to say, oh, he got the wrong response, so he goaded it into saying this or that or the other thing. So I wanted it, I said to our production team, no, it's got to be just continuous all the way through. And of course, there were many glitches, because when we did the Grok series, Grok 4 had just dropped, and of course, tons of people were on it, and you can see all the, and so people were saying, why don't you edit it, and why don't you, here, I can give you advice on how to clean it up and all that stuff, and we appreciate the input, of course, but we wanted it to just be that continuous stream, okay? And what I repeated many times in the videos, you'll see me say it, and I continue to say it, go try it yourself. This is repeatable. After I started to, see how the parameters would affect the AIs, I had several friends of mine, I would send them scripts, so to speak, and just say, ask it this, and use these parameters, and they were getting the same results. So you might think that's programming the AI, but if that's programming it, well, then I'm guilty. I programmed it to stick to strict logic, mathematical probability, and observational science, okay? Now, here's the thing. Here's the other reason I wanted to do it. Who knows who's seen those videos? There's been a lot of people contact me. And so I wanted to make a record of what these AIs were saying today, a month ago now, 2 months ago, just to see in a year from now whether I can ask the same questions and see if it's changed or not. But anyway, there's some more coming up that I think you'll be interested in. Okay, let's just see if I can see any other ones here now. Here's Anthony Reed again. He said, sorry, I meant the Elton anomaly brought me become a believer after 30 years of atheism. Well, that's incredible, brother. I wasn't an atheist for as long as you, but I'm glad the Lord reached out and did what he did. Here's another, Siri Lowell, $20. As a group of people that enjoy and appreciate your content, gathered here tonight, can we take a moment to pray for you and your family, and how shall we do it? I really, really appreciate that. Thank you for the $20, and I appreciate the prayers. I'm a granddad now, 14 times over, which is amazing. You do your part, and then they do theirs. But I have one of my grandchildren that is undergoing some very serious medical treatment, and so we would really appreciate you praying for my granddaughter. So if you could continue to do that, and those of you who are prayer warriors out there, I would appreciate if you could continue to do that for us as well. Other than that, the family is doing quite good, and so again, covet those prayers. Let's see if we can continue here. This is Chris, $4.99. Thanks so much. He says, why hold to the Masoretic text for Genesis 11? Josephus, Pentateuch agree with different dates. This adds 400 years before the flood and Babel to repopulate. Chris, I am sorry, but I don't feel like I could actually give you a proper answer. I don't think I have the, I've never really done the study as much as I probably should, and thanks for pointing that out to me, and perhaps I can do that and answer you next time around, but I never like to make up answers to questions that come in that I don't really have a great answer to. So I'll note that, and perhaps I can do a study on it. And perhaps you can check out the Answers in Genesis website, to see if there's an answer there. Because typically, if it has to do with Genesis, somebody on the team has taken a deep dive, and we've got some people with some great expertise, so you may want to check that out. Okay, I know that we did get some questions earlier as well about Genesis 1 and 2 and the supposed discrepancy there. So let me tackle that. I think the fellow was from the UK. He asked the question, and then I don't think he could stick around because it's late there. So let's see if I can pop this up. That's not it. Go here. No, not that one. Okay, I think this is what I'm looking for. To cosmic times. No, it's not there. Let me see. It's going to take longer than it's going to take longer than I'd hoped for. I thought I'd brought it up. And so here's what I'll tell you. Yes, sir. I'm getting some technical help here. Oh, there we go. What I'd done, and I don't know what happened, I must have hit the tab off or something like that, is I actually went to the Answers in Genesis website and brought up the article, and that's what I was going to do, is actually show it to you on screen and go through the argument, because the argument is basically that there's two different creation stories in Genesis 1 and 1-2, or Genesis 2. And these are very common questions, okay, things that I would get in Q&As all the time, etc. What we call answers book questions. And the reason for that is we have a series of answers books. There's 4 of them. And they answer the most common questions that we get out there. So we always encourage Christians to have these on their bookshelf because they're quick, punctuated answers to the most common questions. What about carbon dating and dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff? And so I was going to bring it up and actually walk through it with you just to point people to the website. Answers in Genesis has got a fantastic website. We've been around for many, many years. We've had a lot of people thinking about these things. So instead of wasting the time here to look it up again or go through it all, just look up, contradictions between Genesis 1:1 or 1:2, and you can actually check that out. So anyway, check that out. I wanted to bring up this article to demonstrate again the difference between my kettle here and the repeatable experiment we can do over and over again. And I thought this was interesting. This was from the NASA website, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration's website. And here they are talking about the age and the size of the universe through the years. And, I've been on the planet now, I'll be 59 in December, so almost 60 years. And so imagine the differences I've seen in my lifetime about so-called science and what was supposedly fact and what you were supposed to believe, etc., right? So, for example, chimp-human DNA, right? That's going to be one of the AI chats we put out there pretty soon. But anyway, or think of junk DNA, right? Junk DNA, supposedly a massive amount of our genome was just evolutionary leftover junk, and now an article came out this year, guess what? It's not. But anyway, here was an article talking about the age and size of the universe through the years. And it said, our estimate of the age and size of the universe has changed during the past century. Now, what you'll notice is when this water boils and I stick the thermometer in there and I pull it out, it's going to be 99 degrees again. It's not going to have changed. And if I do the experiment in a year from now, if the Lord tarries, it'll be 99 degrees if I'm in the same space. So again, there must be a difference in the type of science we're talking about when we're talking about origins here, okay? So it's talking about the age of the universe and the size of the universe, okay? And here we go, from 1919, the age of the universe was supposed to be infinite. There was no beginning. That's the common thought of the day back then. And the size was supposed to be 300 200,000 light years, okay? So in the early 20th century, astronomers thought that the universe was infinitely old and unchanging. Meanwhile, geologists were determining the age of the Earth to be about 1.6 billion years old using early applications of radioactive decay. Oh, okay. So you'll notice that they're talking about geology and the age of the Earth, and you will notice, and oftentimes I get this criticism all the time, well, how come the radiometric dating and the geologic time scale and all these estimates, they always seem to just, match each other. If there's discrepancies, how come they're always, well, you'll see that obviously the 1.6 billion years, talking about radioactive decay, that wasn't true. But back then, it was true, in the sense that if you asked the experts, that's what you got taught. And it was fact, and it was science, right? Okay, let's go up to 1929. The age of the Earth is 2 billion years old, 0.4 billion, or million years older than the radiometric dating from 1919. And the size has now grown to 280 million years, light years across. And it talks about how Hubble had figured out this and figured out that. And then it said, interestingly, at the same time, geologists had determined the age of the Earth to be 3 billion years old. Oh, cool. So from 1919 to 1929, just 10 years, the Earth doubled in age. So obviously, it's not the same type of science as empirical, repeatable, observable, operational science. They're making guesses, right? You know what all these guesses presuppose? That the Word of God isn't true, right? Because the Word of God doesn't talk about millions and billions of years. As a matter of fact, it teaches against millions and billions of years. You ever heard Jesus say that from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female? That makes sense if God created Adam and Eve on day 6 of creation, about 6,000 years ago, but it certainly makes zero sense if he created them some 6,000 years ago after the end of 14 billion years from the beginning of the creation. 1955, the age of the Earth is now 6 billion years old. Interesting. And the size is 4 billion light years. Okay. 1965, the year before I was born, the age is 10 to 25 billion years. Size 25 billion light years. Interesting. 1993, 12 to 20 billion years, 30 billion light years. And then by 2006, we lock in at about 13.7 billion years and about 94 billion light years across, right? Let's just check here. Yeah, 99 degrees. I hope you're getting a point. When someone comes along and says this absolute thing about dating methods and, rock layers and the fossil record and so on and so on and so on, you're hearing a story. You'll always hear me say that in my videos. The story of evolution. Because that's what it is. It's a story that really supports atheism, is what it does. Because it teaches you that everything happened naturalistically. There's no need of a God to explain existence. And I get this criticism all the time. People say, well, evolution's not about geology and evolution's not about cosmology. Yes, it is. Just Google, okay, go to Amazon. Forget Google. Go to Amazon and just type in search cosmic evolution. See how many books have been written about the age of the Earth and cosmology. Okay, that's what they call it, cosmic evolution. Try geological evolution. See how many hits you get. Try chemical evolution. Try biological evolution. Try human evolution. All of reality is explained in this naturalistic sense. So don't let unless they specify, we're talking about biological evolution, don't ever fall for the old canard. Oh, well, evolution's just about, living things changing. No, it's about everything now. It's basically an atheistic worldview is what it is. Let me see here. Trying to find more super chats. Can't really see any here. Let me back out. Oops, wrong way around. I'll bring this up so we can chat some more. Okay, let me go through here. I had 4 specific points I wanted to walk through. So, this is exciting. Some of you might be excited. Some of you might not be. But for a while now, as the channel has really grown. And by the way, we so appreciate our supporters. Like, we really, really appreciate you so much. The channel growth has just been phenomenal. The reaction and people from around the world supporting, I can't believe it. So we really do appreciate it because we're Answers in Genesis Canada. We're our own separate charitable ministry here in Canada. We've got six employees. Okay, you compare that to the U.S. Obviously, they've got an Ark in Canada. They've got a Creation Museum. They've got about 1,600 employees year-round. It's phenomenal. I'm actually going down there next week to the Answers for Pastors and the Christian Leaders Conference, so it's always fun. But yeah, it's a little bit of a different game here, and so the video outreach has been so important. So we really appreciate when people support us. So for a while now, people were saying, well, maybe AIG Canada should have some kind of merch to help support the ministry, because really our biggest need is just video editors, to be honest. You may not realize it, but I'm in the studio here and this is changing all the time and we set up different things. But from the day we record, okay, a video, let's say a 16-minute video, I think that's about our average, it takes our guys 3 weeks from beginning to end to finish that video. We try to put a lot of time and care and effort into the videos because I recognize that YouTube is becoming flooded with content right now. So in my opinion, we're trying to do these little mini documentary style videos in a way that's a little bit different, trying our best to be as high as quality as we possibly can. And so it just takes a lot of effort. I could bang out, talking head videos with no B-roll and all that stuff all day long, but we just want to do something a little more different, and we're getting great feedback because of it. So some people said, well, you should have some merch. And, I'm thinking like, what kind of merch do we get? Because you ever notice all these YouTubers selling coffee? I have my own brand of coffee. Come on, you're label slapping your name on some company's, coffee and calling it your own and asking people to buy it. And I don't know, it just didn't appeal to me at all. So anyway, we did some creative searching and thinking about things, and we thought, well, there's a couple things we could offer that we thought might be enticing to people. And so we're in the process of looking through this now. So one thing, I didn't want to just make something that was just so abstract to what we're doing here that it didn't relate at all. So I thought, why not playing cards? Now, I hope nobody out there that's a believer is offended. Okay, some people relate that to tarot cards and all that kind of stuff. I have never seen a connection like that. I like to play a good game of crib. We've got one of the Ark Encounter cribbage boards. We play that, and so on. And so I associate that with fellowship, with inviting people over. You have a meal. Hey, you want to have a game of cards, and you just have fun. And of course, you're talking and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, what if we came up with decks of cards? And on the back, we had some of our feature series. So like the Genesis account of Noah's Ark, that beautiful graphic that Joshua, he's no longer with us, but when he was here, he's still alive. He just doesn't work with us anymore. He did a fantastic job of that imagery. Freak Show, that logo, Amazing Animals, the Genesis account of Noah's Ark Season 2. What else? The Talk with Grok. We thought it'd be great to have that. And then just put a simple @Answers Canada. And the idea being that you could gift that to somebody and it would make a unique a set of cards, and they would see that and perhaps go, or maybe you're playing a game of cards with your friends, and they say, well, what's that? And you say, oh, well, that's a YouTube channel where they've got a lot of information, and maybe you can encourage your Christian friends, or maybe challenge your non-Christian friends. So we're looking into that. And then we thought, well, every Friday we pop out a video. So what do you do when you watch a video? Well, if it's Friday evening and you want to eat some popcorn, we're going to make up these popcorn packets, and they're going to have some really nice artwork on it as well that relate to one of our series. And so, it's Friday night, and you want to watch an Answers in Genesis Canada video. It just came out on Friday, and you sit down, you make your popcorn, and you put your seasoning on there, and you watch whatever we've come up with. We're going to make some mugs. Everybody seems to like to have a mug, so we're going to have a Talk with Grok one, a Freak Show one. And these are going to be limited time efforts. And then I've got something in the works right now that's a little bit different, and it ties directly into something that you can access right now, and that's it's my ebook. And the ebook is titled "Fellow Biblical Creationists, Stop Doing These Three Things." Now, if you weren't aware that you can get a free copy of my ebook in any of our videos on our channel, just click the video and then go into the notes. And if you just scroll down there, you will see free ebook. And you can sign up and have that sent to you. And I was looking over this the other day, and I hate to pat myself on the back, but I thought, you know what? There's some really good content here. Because one of the things and the reason why I wrote this, is one of the things that I've noticed over the years is so many Christians who get so frustrated when they came to understand the importance of the creation message, which is not really about creation and the age of the earth and all that stuff. It's about biblical authority and how trying to add millions of years and evolution to the Bible is so damaging to the gospel. Okay? And so they would come to a meeting or something and get excited to read a book, and then they'd go talk to their friends, and a lot of times their Christian friends are like, well, who cares? Maybe God used evolution. Who cares about the age of the earth? It doesn't affect anybody's salvation. And so, I don't know, some of the ways that I've seen Christians try to talk to other Christians about that just didn't seem to be very palatable to me. And so that's why I wrote this little ebook. And so stop doing these three things, okay? But then I thought, well, that's fine. You might want to stop doing these three things, but then what do I do, right? There's the negative. What do I do? And so I'm in the process right now, and I'll have a video version of this. I'm going to have a video version of my ebook, by the way. I'm also going to make up actual physical copies because some people just like that better than having an ebook. And it'll be, inexpensive, just a little mini book kind of thing, pamphlet, not a pamphlet, but book with a soft cover. And I'll be producing all of this in video and printed format. And I thought, okay, what if I could give the average Christian just a simple outline that they could sit down with one of their Christian friends and walk through some important information in just 15 minutes. Super simple, Jack and Jill, literally fill in the blanks, as in we're going to have a pad of paper with just a brief outline that you can just rip off a sheet or print it or whatever like that. And, just talk to one of your buddies at church or whatever and say, hey, you want to grab a coffee sometime? I've been thinking about some things, looking at the Bible, and a couple of things pointed out. I just want your feedback. Sit down with them and just walk through a little mini presentation of basically, it's like a pared down version of a talk I've been doing for years now at church. It's called Genesis, the Missing Piece of the Puzzle. But it really gets to the point nice and quickly. And between this ebook and that teaching, I think you'll have a very good way to talk to people about the importance of it. Because what I think most Christians that don't understand why a ministry like Answers in Genesis exists is they don't understand it's all about Jesus, okay? And the character of Christ and who he is and the gospel. And then, what are you talking about? You guys talk about the age of the earth and radiometric dating and evolution. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter whether you get saved or not. Yeah, I know it's not a salvific issue. We make that point constantly. Okay? Can you be an evolutionist and be born again and go to heaven? Of course you can. Okay? We've never said you couldn't, although that's been accuses us many times, and it's not true. But it is a gospel issue, and I'll explain it like this. Think of it this way. There might be some of you here on the side that just you've never thought this through. In the book of Acts, we read that Jesus of Nazareth was appointed by God, and he went around doing good things. Now, even non-Christians, if they know the Bible stories, so to speak, know some of the things that Jesus did, the good things. What were some of those things? Remember the guy with the crippled hand? Remember the guy who couldn't walk? He healed his legs, right? He could walk. Infirmity, right? Jesus healed that. Remember the blind people that he healed? Remember the people with leprosy, disease? He healed disease, right? He even brought a dead man back to life. And he calmed a presumably life-threatening storm, right? And these are all good things. Now, here's a very simple question. How do we know what Jesus did was good? Simple. Because what he fixed was bad. Death is bad. It's an intrusion into this world. Death is literally the last enemy to be destroyed in Scripture. It came in at a very specific point when Adam sinned, right? Romans 5:12, through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men because all have sinned, right? You know, think about it. Satan sinned first. The world wasn't permeated with sin and death. Then Eve sinned. No. One man, Adam. Jesus became the last Adam, right? So Christ has come to fix the problems that the first Adam brought in. Now, there's going to be a complete fixing of that in a fully restored new heavens and new earth, okay? But Christ came, that's why we can be saved, for those who put their faith and trust in him. Okay, so Jesus, his character. We know Jesus' character. We know he's good. We know he did good things. Okay, so for those believers out there that have perhaps not thought of this, if you're trying to add millions of years to the Bible, or evolution via millions of years, where can you put it? There's only one place. You have to put it somewhere in the 6 days of creation. Because you can't put it in after Adam and Eve come on the scene, okay? Because then you've got a chronology, begat, all the way up to Jesus and all the way back down again. So the only place to put supposed millions of years is in the 6 days of creation, okay? So if you say that those 6 days were really 6 vast time periods, then the rock layers, which is the main stay of the evolutionary evidences for millions of years, the rock layers containing dead things, fossils, all over the world, you now have to relegate to the 6 days of creation. So it's not just the rock layers that were laid down during the 6 days, it's what's in the rock layers. And what's in the rock layers is death. Death, suffering, disease like cancer. We find cancer in the fossil record, okay? All sorts of diseases. Bloodshed. And by the way, there's even fully human fossils dated to up to 300,000 years old now. Okay, not ape men, human beings. Evolutionists, according to their evolutionary dating methods, are saying we're 300,000 years old. So you have to say now humans were dying alongside all the creatures for millions and millions of years. And that's the way God created. See, Jesus is revealed as the creator in the book of Colossians. Christ the creator. My friend, are you willing to say this out loud according to that worldview? Okay, because this is the logical extension. Jesus, the creator, used billions of years of death, suffering, pain, disease, cancer to create. And at the end of the creation, he called it very good. And then Adam sinned, and then the fall happened. So, if at the end of the creation everything was very good, then that would mean death is good, right? And disease is good? Infirmity is good? Then why did Jesus fix those things in the New Testament? I thought those were bad things because we went around doing good, and all of a sudden the gospel starts vanishing. It doesn't make any sense theologically whatsoever. And so this is what we're on about. This is about Jesus. This is about his character, who he is, our Savior. Like the age there, who cares except for this, right? It's about the integrity of who God is and whether we can take the Bible at his word. Because so many people, it's so obvious, well, if I don't have to take this part as plainly written, I don't have to take this part as plainly written. It's just so logical in their mind. So that's why we're on about what we're on about. Okay, well, sorry about that. Again, this is my first time doing a live stream, so I just and apparently I wasn't seeing many of the questions you had, so let me get to those. I wasn't trying to ignore anybody here, but Big Stink asked, do you think there's a best topical question to ask an atheist to get them to challenge their own thoughts and beliefs? Well, I guess it depends on whether you're talking about, is there some kind of, scientific or apologetic question to ask them, or really whether you're talking about philosophy. Because the biggest challenge for the atheist is the fact that there is absolutely no meaning to life in the atheistic worldview. I mean, the existentialist accepts that they have to they have to create a meaning for life. For everything, really, for purpose, for value, for ethics, all this kind of stuff. They can adopt various, morality or ethics or something like that. But in the end, in their worldview, they're going to die. Their kids are going to die. Their grandkids are going to die. Eventually, the universe suffers heat death. Everything's dead. Nobody even knows we were here. So what's the meaning and purpose in life, right? So there's one thing you can try to get them to track with, and some of them will just go, well, too bad, and I find that a good thing to get people thinking about is just the origin of information. Because if you really think it through, coded language systems have only ever been seen to come from an intelligent mind. And that's just so intuitive that, for example, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Life, they used to work with NASA, and they were always listening for signals from outer space. Why? Because if they heard a code, they would know there was intelligent life out there. And yet we look down our microscopes and we see the most sophisticated coded language we've ever seen, DNA. Like, it's just so mind-blowing. I can't keep up with the sophistication. And so if you can get them to see, that's why, I'll use simple ways to explain it. Like if I write my name on a chalkboard, hi, my name's Cal, where'd the information come from? Because if I wipe off the chalk, there's no information in chalk, right? I can scrawl in the sand, Susie loves Johnny. Well, with this, sand doesn't contain information. So sometimes things like that, I know when I was challenged with concepts like that, I hadn't really thought them through before, and I was like, oh yeah, right? That makes sense. That's logical. Not everybody is just, in direct opposition to everything of God. There's a scale out there. So hopefully those give you two different tacks you might want to see. Let me see here. We got common pushback against C14 presence in fossilization bones is contamination or instrumental noise. My question is, are there any resources to combat the pushback, studies to reference God bless? If you're looking for specific studies, I would go to the Answers in Genesis website and just put in, C14 dating discrepancy or anything like that. My question to evolutionists about contamination is always this. I don't know if you've ever watched the Canadian TV show. It's called Oak Island. And there's an island out in Nova Scotia, and of course they think they've found everything from the Holy Grail to whatever. Anyway, they haven't found anything yet. But at Brock University, there used to be a sample on file at Brock University. It was a piece of coalified wood from Oak Island. And right on their website, they said it had been carbon dated several times, and the result that kept coming out was plus 3,000 years into the future. That was on the Brock University website. And so when I would ask an evolutionist about this, they would say, well, of course, it's been contaminated. Now, if you're not familiar with radiocarbon dating, you got carbon-14, carbon-12. When you're alive, it's supposed to be at equilibrium. When the organism dies, you're supposed to, the half-life of carbon, that's where you get that term, half of that amount, half of that amount. Shouldn't be anything there more than 100,000 years, etc. But in this case, there's plus 3,000 years or into the future. There's so much carbon, it's past equilibrium. And so they would say, well, obviously it's been contaminated. And so I would say, well, how do you know when something's been contaminated and when it hasn't? And you'd hear, well, obviously this has because it's past equilibrium. But that's not an answer, okay? How do you know if it's been contaminated or not? And actually, I'm going to be doing an AI presentation coming soon where I ask that question, because that's the biggest question in radiometric dating of all sorts, okay, not just carbon dating, is how can you guarantee sample purity? Because you'd have to have at least 95% confidence that your sample was pure. And yet, any sample taken in the wild could have been contaminated at some point. They would have to admit that. So anyway, things to think about. If you're looking for specific examples, go to the Answers in Genesis website. Question, I love science and I'm a Christian. Dinosaurs are awesome. How as a Christian can I be a paleontologist and research with scientists or creationists? How can I go to school to do that? Well, that's an interesting question. I've been saying for years now that I would love to see a next generation of Christian young people that love the Lord their God with all their heart, strength, soul, and mind. That sounds like where you want to go. You want to be a scientist. You want to be a paleontologist. But you're going to have to go to a secular university. And that's a tough thing to do right now, okay? Because those are very highly evolutionary indoctrination oriented. And so I know one fellow, Dr. Jason Lyle, who went through his university education. I think he's a physicist. I think Jason is. He's brilliant, by the way. He's written a couple of books, The Ultimate Proof of Creation. Phenomenal. Check out his, I think he's got a YouTube channel, Dr. Jason Lyle. I used to call him, what was that show? Anyway, he's so young looking, but anyway, he's a brilliant guy. And he went through his entire education, got his PhD, and then came out as a creationist. And the reason he did that is because he felt that if he had told them he was a biblical creationist, they would have denied him his PhD. And that's a sad state of affairs. And maybe the university you went to, maybe they wouldn't be as highly biased. But there's been several documented cases where even evolutionists just even trying to be open-minded have been severely punished for doing so. So you may have to kind of stick-handle your way through and then just stick to your beliefs. And you're going to want to know the creationist interpretations of what you're being taught all the way through. A great example of someone who did that was Patricia Engler. And Patricia is pursuing her PhD. She's a Canadian. She used to be on staff here at AIGU Canada. She's now on staff at AIG US. She's written a couple of books. Her first book is all about how Christian young people can survive secular indoctrination going into university and how to survive that situation. And one of the things she really recommends is having a mentor. So if you're really serious about this and you're willing to run the gauntlet, then perhaps you could reach out to Answers in Genesis and see if there would be one of the scientists that would be willing to take you on and mentor you. But you'd have to be pretty serious about what you're doing in order for someone to do that. Let's go here. Questions. How are cave paintings dated? For example, cave paintings in Australia that are claimed to be 40,000 years old. Good question. I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry. And again, as you've heard me say before, I'm not just going to make something up. I don't know how they do that. I don't know if they assume by the images in the picture, if they've got a woolly mammoth or something, that then they date that according to how old they think mammoths are or something like that. That would be a great question maybe to fire off on the website as well. Again, I'm sorry I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll tell you one thing. I love doing things like this. Over the years, I've done many Q&As, and I like to do the same thing I've always encouraged other Christians to do, is you can't know the answer to every question, but don't get asked the same question twice without getting an answer. So here's 2 questions now, which will make me dig in and take a look, so that if a skeptic ever asked me that question, I could hopefully have a good answer for them. Okay, question. Why have we not found a single human skeleton from before the flood? That's a great question. Now, that kind of goes into 2 categories. The way you've asked the question here is we haven't found a single human skeleton. And from what I understand and researched, even though there's been some people say that they think they've found pre-flood human bones, I don't think I've ever seen anything credible. Now, I remember one presenter from AIG pointing out the verse in the flood narrative, somewhere in between Genesis 6 to 9, where God said he would blot out humankind. And so he was saying perhaps God said he was just going to erase like every vestige of humans from the fossil record. I don't know, maybe. The scripture does say that, but you could read that verse different ways, right? The fact that he blotted them out means they all died too. So then you get into, thinking about just the percentage of humans versus perhaps other animals on the planet at the time. And we don't know how many people were on the planet when the flood hit. Some people say, different rates or something like that. But let's say we go with 10 million people at the time of the flood. If you took 10 million people and they were preserved, by the way, most bones are, okay, even when you find an actual bone, that's a very small percentage of the fossil record. Mostly we find shells and corals and leaves and stuff like that. And so when we finally get to hard parts, that's a very small percentage of the fossil record. And to find a skeleton that's articulated to any degree, that's a big deal. So I think there's maybe 13 or 14 tyrannosaur, articulated skeletons. That's a big deal when you find a lot of bones together, okay? They're not as common as you think. So if you had every human, 10 million of them, all their body completely fossilized at the time of the flood, 700 million cubic kilometers, you'd have one human fossil completely in every 70 kilometers squared around the world, which is pretty small, okay? So it could be, in comparison to the other animals that were alive at the time, all of the other kinds of creatures and the millions of them, that perhaps we just haven't found one yet. But one common argument I've heard and had to deal with, and we did so in our dealing with dinosaurs on Noah's Ark, the second season of the Genesis account of Noah's Ark, is the question of why haven't dinosaurs and humans ever been found together? Because the argument is this: if we're saying that these creatures coexisted at the same time, then we should be able to find examples of them together at the same time, which has a certain degree of logic to it. But one of the things I pointed out is that why haven't we ever found whales and coelacanths together? I mean, coelacanths were once upon a time supposed to be an index fossil indicating that they lived at the time of the dinosaurs, okay? But of course, then they found live ones off the coast of Madagascar, so that doesn't really pan out. But supposedly whales evolved about 50 million years ago. So that would mean in their timeline that whales and coelacanths coexisted for 50 million years. Now, some people have criticized and say, well, they live in different, spheres in the ocean, but actually whales go all the way through, the levels that coelacanths live and stuff like that. So we haven't found one coelacanth with whale, even though they live in the same environment, okay? And they supposedly lived together for 50 million years. That's a lot of chances for those two things to be found in the same environment, right? Now, you take the biblical timeline, you've got 1,650 years up to the time of the flood. Well, how long did the flood last? Because that's the amount of time that you could just so happen to have these creatures, entombed together. Well, you've got about a year, right? So compare 1 year, just so happens that these two creatures get, caught together, versus 50 million. I think the burden of proof is on them. If you're going to start arguing about if the creatures live together at the same time, we should find them. So anyway, hopefully that answered some of your questions there. Let's go for some more. Are there any good programs to teach 7th graders these scientific creation findings if they've only had secularist millions of years evolutionary ideas? Well, I think there's lots of stuff from Answers in Genesis at different grade levels. I would say, let's be honest, I hear from a lot of supporters that, hey, we watch your videos, I watch them with my kids. So I'm trying to keep the communication at a pretty basic level, and I think I do. So I think a lot of younger people could listen to our videos and watch them, especially if there was an adult there to kind of, stick handle through anything that might be a little more sophisticated, but I try to keep it at a pretty basic level. So there's a wide range of resources available through the website for young people as well, but I think our videos do a good job. Question about certain features in animals. Snakes use venom to kill, and other animals have defense mechanisms, etc. Why do these animals have these features if animals didn't eat one another before sin? That's a great question, and I've actually written a blog about it. Can't think of the name of the blog off the top of my head. But I don't know if you Google like animal death or something like that. Anyway, let me go through that, because that's a really good question. Because I remember when I was first exploring these topics, I was thinking, some of the explanations creationists would say was like, well, maybe creatures are using their equipment in ways they wouldn't have before the fall. Like maybe if they were using sharp teeth to eat something like a melon or something, because you do need a sharp knife to cut through a watermelon or something like that, then maybe they're using it on you now, and that would be an explanation. But some of the things that animals have, like venom and attack defense structures and all that kind of stuff, it's pretty hard to explain as them having a good, positive feature. So in my article, what I argued, and there's a field of study called epigenetics. Epigenetics is very interesting because it's almost Lamarckian in its construct. And what I mean by that is there was a fellow named Lamarck around the time of Darwin, who he was the guy who argued a kind of evolution like, well, how did giraffes get their long neck? Well, they had short necks, and then they stretched their necks to get the high leaves, and that stretching effect was then passed on to their offspring, et cetera, et cetera. But obviously that doesn't work, because if I cut my fingers off and then I have a son, my son doesn't have fingers that are cut off, right? You don't pass on those things. So epigenetics is very interesting, and I talk about this in one of the episodes of the Amazing Animals series, where I talk about grasshoppers turning into locusts. They used to think grasshoppers and locusts were two, separate creatures, but now they know under certain environments, grasshoppers will actually morph into locusts, behaviorally at first, and then morphologically in the next generations. So their heads are like 30% bigger, and their behavior is completely different, and they can actually morph back. So they're transformers in a sense. So the DNA sequence is exactly the same, but different parts of the DNA is being activated and stuff, and that's kind of what epigenetics is all about. So we do know, for example, at the time of the fall, that thorns appeared. They weren't there, all of a sudden they appear. And kind of the the way Exodus 20:11, it's a cruel sword, right? Because it says, for in 6 days the Lord created the heavens, earth, the sea, and all that is in them. Well, if thorns appear, but everything was created in the first 6 days, it appears like thorns are being created that weren't there before. So my article argues for the fact that God, foreknowing the fall, just like a police officer has a gun at his hip and doesn't want to use it, but in certain circumstances he has to because of the situation. I argued that in the beginning God created everything, foreknowing the fall, with all of that information in there, and it got activated under certain circumstances after the fall. So that's one way that creationists would explain those types of things. They weren't there in the very good world, but came in afterwards. Let's see. An article about the current question can be found here. Oh, awesome. Okay. Is there another question after this one? Let's see. Well, we did get a super chat for $2. Said, step away, Mama called, only family I got left. And she left a $2 super chat. So thanks so much. Appreciate that. Let's see if there's any more here down at the bottom. Okay, wow. $100. Nate, thank you so much, brother. That's amazing. He said, thanks to you and team for the soldiering you do. I know you might not always see or feel the impact of your work, but I, for one, can say it means a lot to me. God bless and keep fighting the good fight for the glory of our God. Well, Nate, I can honestly say thank you for what you've done here too, because that was an amazing gift, and that helps us to continue to do what we do. Because yeah, we would love to bring on a whole slew of new editors and do even more work. Actually, that's probably a good segue into the last thing I wanted to discuss, which was upcoming projects and ideas that we have. We've already filmed a 12-part series that's going to be coming out next year. And I think episode 3 has been finished now. So it's a long time, like I said, 3 weeks to finish a video. And so that'll be coming out sometime, probably the 3rd month or 4th month of next year. It's a 12-part series, The Shadow League, and really it gets into this, the fact that I think many Christians out there right now are just looking at society going, how did we get here? Like they just woke up one morning and the culture just, bombed out. So no. There have been many specific things at play for a long, long time, okay? When you look into people like Charles Lyell, and you look into people like things like what Charles Darwin actually said, talking to one of his friends and saying how they should spread the gospel, the devil's gospel. And he was talking about old ages and millions of years. It's pretty sinister when you think about it. But I go back all the way back to Erasmus Darwin, who had written a treatise on evolution long before his grandson ever did, and really show the beginnings and show all the way through what's actually been going on and show the root cause of where we've arrived here. So you can hopefully look forward to that. But another idea that I've had in my head for a long time now, obviously being a Canadian, is the fact that Charles Lyell, who was really the guy who really embedded the concept of millions of years into academia around the world. First in England, obviously, and then around the world. And of course, without millions of years, you don't get evolution, which of course is the atheist rebuttal to God. He visited Canada. He visited 2 spots. He visited Joggins, Nova Scotia, the famous fossil cliffs there, highest tides of the world in the Bay of Fundy. And he interpreted what he saw there through his old deep time lens. And he also went to Niagara Falls, and he fudged his data at Niagara Falls, because what he did there is he was saying, okay, we can see where the falls are now, and you could see where they started. And, he wanted to know how long it took the falls to get where they were. So the erosion rates, he asked the locals, and they said, you lose about 4 to 5 feet per year. Now, these were people who'd lived there for many, many, many years. They'd seen it happen. could compare it to fences they'd put out and stuff. But that didn't work for Lyell, because that would have put the falls, within the biblical time frame. So he went back to England, and he wrote it at 1 foot per year. And that put the fall's origins at 10,000 years, which broke the biblical timeline. And because he was Sir Charles Lyell, and there wasn't air traffic, and you couldn't fly back and forth and all that stuff, and he'd been there, people took him at his word. And that was another major punch into the Genesis account as plainly written. So there's a lot of things, that could be made into a really cool documentary, I think. And we try to do the best we can. Obviously, we've got the studio here, and sometimes I get out and, we go to different locations and stuff. But that would require a major, well, not major, but I mean, we would have to either drive or fly out to Nova Scotia, do some filming there for several days, and you've got hotels and all that stuff. And then we'd have to go to Niagara Falls and do some work there and stuff. So, yeah, maybe even the Burgess Shale, we could take a look at different things there. But anyway, all that being said, it takes time and it takes money. But I think it would be a really fun thing to do. So where are we at here anyway, time-wise? 8:39, okay. Well, I don't want to miss anybody. So let me just take a look here. Nate's super chat. I don't see any other ones. Okay, well, I can't see anything else here. So if there's anybody out there that would like to ask a question, fire it out now before we wrap it up. But anyway, this was a lot of fun. I was pretty surprised. About an hour before I came into the studio, of course, the guys had been here for a while, and just looking at the chat and people coming in there already and so on. Do we have some more, Isaac? Oh, great. Isaac's going to hook me up here. I don't know why this thing isn't feeding me your questions, but I do want to take the time to answer anything I can. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Okay, this one says, how would you respond to someone who pushes the climate change agenda? Well, it was interesting. One time I had a fellow in my small group. He was a Christian, and he was studying climate or whatever. I don't know. He had a different name for it. But anyway, he was studying this, and so the topic came up, and he said to me, well, you believe in climate change, right? And I said, well, yeah, it's literally its job description, right? That's what the climate does, it changes. And then he was like, well, I said, oh, do you mean like man-made climate change? Like it's man's fault that weather patterns change? And he said, yes. And I said, well, no, I don't think the evidence is strong for that. And he got fairly volatile. That's what he, was studying, so it was personal to him. You'll find that that's the same for someone studying biology that believes in evolution. They'll, take it personally kind of thing. But anyway, after I was discussing different aspects of it, after a while, I said, well, some of this data you're looking at, could you not interpret that in different ways? Well, yeah, there are different models, and well, what would that lead? Well, yeah, that would lead to different conclusions. And so as we picked into it for a while, because I said to him, I've been around I'm not a scientist, but I've worked with many scientists for about 25 years now, okay? So I've asked a lot of questions, and I kind of know the way this goes. And again, there are many interpretive factors to these things, right? Now, here's the other thing. As I mentioned, I'm a lot closer to 60 than I am 50 now. And I can remember in the 70s living in North Bay, Ontario, which is where I was born, and the big climate drama back then was global freezing. We were going to enter a nuclear winter. And I remember my dad turning down the temperature, the thermostat, and me having to wear extra sweaters because people were buying into this stuff. Now, if you're not aware of that, go to YouTube and look up Leonard Nimoy, global cooling or something like that. And you will see this dramatic presentation from Spock, Leonard Nimoy, talking about how, the doom and gloom and the world was going to freeze and all this stuff, and it was all man-made stuff. Gone. Do you remember, what was it, Acid Rain? I like the band Rush, great Canadian band. And they had a song, I think it was on their, wasn't Moving Pictures, it was Signals, I think. It was talking about the acid rain, because that was a big thing back then. Has anybody heard of acid rain lately? I haven't. There's always a climate crisis. I remember, An Inconvenient Truth. I remember that movie coming out. And that movie was actually shown at the local public school, which my daughter was attending at the time. We later brought our kids out of school, public school. But anyway, I remember her coming home and having all these things in her head, and us going through and looking at all these things and saying, oh, you see this video footage here where the poor little polar bears, that wasn't actually factual the way they demonstrated it. So again, it's like most things, people need to see the difference between facts and interpretation of facts. And it's my personal opinion, and also the Answers in Genesis Ministry's opinion, that many of these, climate, we just think they're hoaxes. They're ways to control people, to get people to react and so on. And of course, I think the last 5 years have taught a lot of people that the so-called trust the science crowd, I think we need to free ourselves from the tyranny of the experts and not just say, well, whatever that scientist is saying must be true. We need to think about these things for ourselves and free ourselves from that. Otherwise, you are just going to be controlled by the next person who comes along and tells you for years and years and years that it's okay to take Tylenol, and that somehow the way viruses operate is when you go into a restaurant, you need to wear a mask. But then when you sit down, you're allowed to take it off, and then you can have your meal. And then when you stand up, you put your mask back on, and then that's science. So, you need to listen to those people. They don't hear what I didn't say. I have worked with scientists for many years. I respect people that are educated and that work hard in their field. But I'm telling you that you, especially as a Christian, need to differentiate, okay, between ideas you're told, okay, from certain authority figures, especially if they conflict with the Word of God. That's really when it's important. Because if you're being told that science has proven millions of years and evolution is a fact, and it's just in total contradiction to Scripture, and you're believing it, you're believing in the authority of the Word of man over the authority of the Word of God. And there's nothing in science that we deny. When I say science, I mean repeatable, observable, operational science, where you can do the experiment over and over again and observe the results. I'm not talking about things like how the age of the earth has doubled every 20 years over the last, 100 years, like we saw earlier. So let's continue from here. I'm not seeing any new questions, but again, that might be because of our technology again. So I'll just ask Isaac here. Do we have any new questions, Isaac? I hear something happening. I don't know how to regenerate it here, so maybe I can do it on my own. What do I need to do here? There we go. Okay. There's a layer of minerals called ringwoodite found in the upper mantle, which contains water. So my question is, do you think it's evidence of the foundations of the deep mentioned in Genesis 7:11? Once again, I don't know about the specific question. I know about your question, but I don't know about that specific thing you're mentioning. So I can't give you a good answer, although it does say the fountains of the great deep burst open, and we do know there's still a lot of water in the mantle. So that very well could be. Maybe check it out on the website. There might be something there. What Bible story, character, and principle stands out to you the most? That is a tough question. It's not an apologize question, but it's tough. I'd like to say probably something like the Apostle Paul, he's the intellectual of the New Testament, and, he's argued persuasively and all that stuff. By the way, he did tell Timothy to avoid foolish arguments, and that's important. I see some of you guys on the chats and the videos and stuff like that, and some of you are very good. Commend you. Thanks for doing that, actually, and taking the time to dialogue. And you ever notice sometimes, though, that some people, it doesn't matter what you say. That's a foolish argument, so avoid that. You need some discernment there. But I think David stands out to me because, he's called the man of God, but he's a scumbag. He literally has his friend murdered so he can sleep with his wife, right? And it's just such a stark example of how we as human beings, we like to think we're good people. We like to think we're great, I'm a nice guy, etc. And it wasn't until I had that "you are that man" moment when I realized I'm a sinner. I've rebelled against the God of creation. It wasn't until I realized my own depravity and my own sin that I was broken enough to be able to come to Christ. And so, it's tough. Oh, there's the man of God. There's the king. There's the example, right, that all the other kings are compared against. And yet he had to be completely humbled like that to attain that status. So I certainly don't give myself the status of David, but I relate to that. The fact that, he's trying to do good things and all this stuff, and then he gets to this pinnacle, and then he's just depravity, human depravity. It's not a pretty thing whatsoever. Let's see if I can find more questions here. Top questions. Show. Let's see. All messages. Wes Simmons here. I haven't seen this one before. This is a super chat. $5. I love your videos. Would you agree the odds of destruction far outweigh that of evolution? Meaning evolution is impossible. Well, Wes, I'm not really sure exactly the way you've mentioned this here. The odds of destruction far outweigh that of evolution. But in terms of the idea that evolution is predicated on, okay, evolution has to have a creative mechanism to generate genetic information for forms, functions, and features that never existed before. If dinosaurs evolved into birds, and dinosaurs didn't have wings and birds do have wings, then something had to generate genetic information for a functional wing, which was somehow, tied into the neurology of that creature, so it knew how to flap. And it's just incredibly sophisticated, right? So all these examples where they're telling you, maybe gene duplication is how we form these new functional genes for all these new forms, functions, and features. I actually pointed it out in one of the AI videos I did, and this is well known, that if you need a sequence of letters to code for whatever your target is, but all of these letters have the same probability of just being randomly flipped around and changed. Even to get 100 letters in a sequence, the closer you get to the target sequence, the more chance it's part of the series that you've already assembled that's going to get changed versus the ones you need to come. So if that was the way you meant your question to be, then yeah, absolutely. That's why mathematics is such an important part of debunking evolution. It just doesn't really make sense when you think about it. Let's go top messages here. Do you believe there's a limit to what humans can understand? For instance, Bill Nye said he enjoys never knowing, and that soon we will. How will we ever without being omniscient? Do I think there's a limit to what humans can understand? Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I talk about it in one of my videos, Mindless Meanderings, I think it was called, where I talk about how as I was a kid, I remember sitting, laying in the grass, looking up at the sky and going, I was young. I was like, okay, so I'm here, and then there's like the sky, and then there's like the stars, and then there's like more, and there's something after that, and my brain had just shut off, because doesn't there have to be a boundary somewhere? But what's past that? We can't even fathom that. We can't figure out that. So, this kind of ties into some of the questions, and it's why I'm not scared not to have an answer sometimes, right? Because you actually can't know the answer to everything. Because if you did, you would be God. That's one of his attributes. So we're never going to be God. I don't care what the Mormons say when they come around. They're incorrect. You're never going to know everything. And so it's just going to be really cool to be with Jesus and be able to ask him cool questions and stuff. But there's going to be things that are hidden just because of our finite human minds. So, yeah. Oh, just wanted to check again here. Don't you know? 99 degrees. Let me see. How do you deal with painful doubt about Christianity's core truths? Doubt that makes you want to constantly research proof for God and make you fear you're unsaved. Okay, this is Rachel. How do you deal with painful doubt about Christianity's core truths? I'm assuming you're speaking about yourself, Rachel, and you're just wondering if I have some advice for how you can trust the Lord. Well, it kind of ties into our last question, right? You can never really know all things and know everything. If that's how you think you're going to gauge ever having faith in Christ or somehow keeping your faith or whatever you're trying to say, that's not going to work. I would say that many people think of Answers in Genesis as an evidentiary ministry, or we're evidentialists. We talk about evidence all the time, okay? Look at this unfossilized soft tissue in dinosaurs, and look at the rock layers and all this stuff. So they think we're evidentialists. We're not. We're presuppositionalists, okay? I presuppose the truth of God and his word. I do. And I know how this game goes with the whole historical versus operational science. So, people don't shake my tree anymore. You're not going to show me a piece of evidence and then interpret it according to evolution and me go, ooh, maybe evolution's true. Just no, I'm going to be able to see that, okay, you can interpret that according to God's word as well. And so I think what will happen, because the Bible says, come let us reason. God does want us to use our mind. Love the Lord your God with all your strength, heart, soul, and mind. So that's a component of it, right? But love the Lord your God with your heart, with your soul. And after a while, you'll get to a balance, okay? I think a lot of people that discover this type of thing, apologetics, right? It's foundational. It's important. You need to remove stumbling blocks. You need to get rid of doubts and all those things. So it's good to do this. But the analogy I would use is it's like living in your home, okay? So you're in your home and you go, whoa, there's a problem. So you go down in the basement and you look around and there's some cracks in the foundation. You're like, oh, this isn't good. So you start doing some work and you start figuring out how, got to fix that. And, but you don't live in your basement. You live upstairs where it's nice and it's sunny and hopefully there's family and, friends and fellowship and food and all that good stuff. And every now and then you go, wait a sec. And you go downstairs. Oh, good. It's all still good. And then you go back upstairs. It's actually one of the things I mentioned in my ebook there, right? Stop doing these 3 things. I think some creationists are living in their basement too much, okay? And so it doesn't seem to matter what you say to them, all they're doing is talking to you about creation. And if you're not like there yet, it's just kind of annoying. You don't want to be around that person, etc. So this is not for you, but this is for those people that are like that. You need to tone it down a bit, okay? That's why this teaching I'm going to come up with, I hope will be helpful to people. But hopefully that helps. I believe it was Rachel. It's just, you're going to get to a point where you're just like, okay, I can trust the Lord. If I can trust the Lord with my eternal soul, I think I can relax and I don't need to know the answer to everything. Explain plants and trees on the 3rd day if there was no sun until the 4th. What about photosynthesis? Super easy. Do you have plants in your house? Does the sun go down where you live? Do they survive till the next day? Don't know what else to tell you. See, inbuilt into that question was the idea that the days were somehow longer than just a 24-hour day, because we know plants can last without light, right? And by the way, it doesn't mean that there wasn't light, because it says God, in the beginning, God created light, and on the fourth day, the sun was created. So God created the sun to be the light bearer, but he created light in the beginning. God created light somehow, whether it was coming from him. You can read in Revelation, it says there will be no more sun, that God will provide the light. I don't see too many people arguing with that. So anyway, seems pretty straightforward. Hopefully that helped. How can the first 3 days of creation be 24 hours if the sun was not created until day 4? Might one day be as 1,000 years? Might the light of Genesis 1:3 be the same as Revelation 22:5? Okay, so you've got some correlation there. So basically all you need for a 24-hour day is a rotating earth and a light source, a directional light source. That's all you do. As a matter of fact, isn't that the way we explain it to kids when we're trying, we get like a ball and you put it on a string and you spin it, and then you're in the dark and you shine the flashlight on it. So I don't know why that's always a question for people, okay? And the other thing is that it's interesting how people are always looking for ways to add millions of years to the Bible, but just remember, if you're ever adding millions of years and you're adding the rock layers as part of the millions of years, you've got death before sin, okay? So there's a huge challenge there, but I just take the Bible as plainly written. If Noah's flood made all the rock layers, how do we find fossilized dinosaurs hatching in a nest site in the middle of the fossil record? Well, that's a great question to ask your evolutionary friends. Yeah, fossilized dinosaurs hatching in a nest site. That's really interesting, right? So what would you need for that to be able to happen? You would need a massive amount of sediments deposited so quickly that those creatures couldn't get out of the way in time. Well, that sounds like a massive catastrophic flood, okay? Now, sometimes I think people have this idea of the flood as, I don't know, like filling up a bathtub, like, and somehow we think the sediments happen that way. We're picturing like massive tsunamis where, waves are coming in and all sorts of sediments hitting and laying down things, and then the water's receding and then perhaps coming from another direction. And this would explain, of course, layers where you can see animal tracks, going in one direction, and then, a meter underneath there, you'll see different animal tracks going in a different direction. And evolutionists try to say, see, that's evidence of millions of years between, but that could just be episodes all during that one catastrophic event. So again, there's different ways to interpret the evidence we see here. But, when I was growing up, I used to equate fossils with deep time because of the way they would always describe sedimentary deposition up until about the mid-70s, early 80s. What they would say is that the sediments got laid down 1 or 2 varves per year. The way we measure sedimentation going down today is what's always happened. You extrapolate that, it must have taken millions of years to put the rock layers down there, like in the Grand Canyon. Okay, but then those pesky creationists, they kept saying, well, wait a sec, how do you bury a fossil then, right? I mean, well, let me just see here. There's a fossil. Okay, it's probably about 5 inches tall. Okay, so how do you bury a fossil at a rate of 1 or 2 varves per year? That thing's going to rot and decay and be gone. So however tall the fossil is, it must have been buried rapidly and completely to that complete coverage in order for it to even be possible to be made into a fossil. Well, I mentioned Joggins, Nova Scotia, where Charles Lyell went, and he interpreted 30-foot tall trees as being slowly buried over millions of years. And of course, today, you talk to modern geologists and they say, well, that's ridiculous. You would have had to bury the entire organism rapidly and completely. So all fossils are actually evidence of something happening quickly, not something happening slowly. So for those dinosaurs to be buried, while they're nesting and stuff like that, that's just more evidence of the catastrophic deluge of Genesis 6 to 9 in my estimation. Can't quite see the name, Volpe, I think. I'm Catholic and appreciate I think really appreciate your work is the way you meant to say it. What is your main argument on the dating methods, Radiocarbon and others? May God bless you. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Volpe, I think that's your name. Well, yeah, the main challenge with all of these dating methods, the radiocarbon dating methods, is number one, they are dependent on the scientist that's doing them, guaranteeing sample purity. And in my estimation, there is no way to guarantee sample purity. And that's why we see discordant results all the time. Now, the average person isn't aware of them. That's why you go to our website and you say, oh, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that, and what about this example? And, one I used in one of the videos, I talked about, the video is called The Dating Game. You can look it up on our channel. And I give several examples of where the dates just don't make sense. Like one, for example, they found in Australia, and there was a basalt layer, and it had flowed over some wood. Okay, so you've got wood completely entombed in rock. And they carbon dated the wood to 44,000 years old, and they used some kind of radiometric dating on the rock and dated it to 44 million years old. How can you have 44,000-year-old wood in 44 million-year-old rock? It doesn't make sense. You know that either one or the other results is incorrect, and we would say both. But anyway, so you need sample purity. And the thing is, most people don't understand that you're using unprovable assumptions in any of these dating methods. And I always use a simple example of a candle. Okay, so I'll just use this here. But let's just say you've got a candle and it's 12 inches tall. And you want to know the decay rate of the candle, how long before it will disappear. And you light the candle and you're looking at the clock and you notice that every hour goes by, you lose 1 inch off the candle. Okay? So your decay rate is 1 inch per hour. That's what you've measured. Okay, that's scientific, right? It is scientific. Now let's say you walk into a room. You've never been in the room before. Okay? You see a candle sitting there, it's lit, and it's 6 inches high. How long has the candle been lit? 6 hours is what most people would say. But if I tell you as the creator of the experiment, I say, no, that's actually wrong. I could show you video proof. This thing has only been burning for 3 hours. What does your mind automatically do? Oh, only 3 hours. Well, maybe it's been decaying at a faster rate. Maybe the window was open over here and the wind blew and it burnt quicker than it did in this. So you automatically start trying to figure out, well, how is that, right? How do you know that the candle wasn't 2 feet tall to start? How do you know that the candle had been lit 20 years ago, burnt for 2 hours, and somebody just lit that candle, 5 seconds before you walked into the room, if you'd never been? So you don't know all these things. There's all these assumptions being made with these dating methods, and most people aren't scientists, okay? Most people don't deal with these things, and so they're surprised sometimes when they hear quotes that we use all the time. One of my favorite quotes I use when I'm at churches and stuff to get people to really understand this, that it's not hard science, it's a quote from Jerry Trout, I think his name is. He's talking about Carlsbad Caverns, okay? And so he was there and he saw the changes in the signs. And he said from 1970 to 1980 something, the sign read that it was that Carlsbad was at least, 80 million years old, and then in the 80s it was changed to 7 to 10 million years old, and then after that it read 3 million years old, and then the sign was gone. And that's not an exact quote, but it's kind of like that. That's what he shows. And I just make the point to people, so what exactly was science? What was fact? See, we're back to this again. Yeah, when the kid went into his school trip before 1980, and he saw that this place was supposedly 100 million years old or whatever it was. Wow! But then his kid brother came in the year after on his school trip and the sign had been changed. What was fact? What was science? What was truth? Right? So I'm always encouraging Christians that are struggling with this kind of stuff, don't marry your theology to these scientific explanations because they're changing all the time. You might get a divorce, You know what I mean? I've seen it happen. That slippery slope that Christians get themselves on, or professing Christians, or whatever way theologically you figure that out. But I'm just pointing this out, that don't put your trust in this stuff. It's constantly changing. Guess what? If I fire that kettle up again, it's going to be 99 degrees Celsius. It's like the Bible. The Bible never changes. I saw a Christian commenting earlier on before the chat started. Well, the Bible's not a science textbook. Well, thank goodness for that. Because if it was, it would change every 10 years. It would be overpriced. Because the Bible isn't a textbook. It's not a science textbook. It's not even a religious book. It claims to be the truth. And it doesn't change. So it's important for believers to keep that in mind. How do you explain how all humanity came from two people? Well, actually, we've recorded the videos. I've already done the blogs, okay? So you can go to the Answers in Genesis website, and let me just see if I can pull this up for you here. Because this will be good for everybody to see, actually. Oh, wrong one. Here we go. Okay, let's go. No. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for... There we go. Okay. So, if you go to our website, and of course, if you're not in Canada, you're going to have to hit that button there. If you're in the US or whatever, like toggle back and forth. We've got a little bit of a different skin here. And then you just go to my blog. You will see tons and tons and tons of articles, okay? And this is the generator for our video content. So I write blogs, which we then take and use as my dialogue for the videos. So this article right here, "Ew, did Cain marry his sister?" I think fits into what your question is. So instead of me taking a ton of time here and going through all that, I know that's a common question, because it's like, where did Cain get his wife? What about genetic load? Could you really have two people? People can't marry close relatives today. Could they do it back? I know all the things, and that's what I cover in these blogs. So just as an example and an exercise for everybody out there, just encourage you to get to the website. There's tons of information there. Check out those things. Hopefully that'll answer your question. And those videos should be coming out fairly soon. So we've got them recorded. Okay, let's see if we've got any more questions here. From South Africa. What does the creation account reveal about God's nature and his relationship to humanity that we often miss? Well, it's that dichotomy, right? We see the beauty in the world, but we see death and we see bad things, in the world. And so we're just sitting there going, well, why is there good things and why is there bad things? And all at the same time. And so I think the creation reveals a very good God, but it also reveals that there's something wrong with this world. And when you think about it, that comes in with God's judgment, because God couldn't have just allowed Adam and Eve to go about living in a very perfect world. I mean, think of a simple analogy, like we probably all know the example of a kid who's living at home, and they've got shelter, and they've got food, and they've got, they're comfortable and all this kind of stuff, right? Very good home. And they just won't obey the rules. And finally, it gets so bad that the parents are like, okay, you're going to have to leave. It's going to be worse for you. You're going to have to work for yourself. You're going to work by the sweat of your brow, okay? The environment's not going to be the same. It's dog eat dog out there. And so that's analogous, right? If God had not cursed the world, because some people think, well, that's not fair. I wasn't, there. Well, it's pretty fair when you think about that you chose to sin and you chose to do it constantly, okay? You can have your turn with Adam in the new heavens and new earth if you are Christian. But anyway, God couldn't have just not done anything about the environment. Otherwise, they could have been living separated from God and not even know there were anything wrong. So I think that's one of the main things about the creation that we can see now. What do we got here? Siri Lol, just please pray for us as we are tired in this world watching all that goes on. Will you pray for us before you leave? Absolutely, I will pray before I leave. I was looking forward to doing that, actually. We're not quite done here yet, though. I still think there's more questions, and I really do want to take the time to answer people's questions if I can. What are your thoughts on the ideas of the Antichrist being an AI? Well, again, we received so many different inquiries about this kind of thing, and I know people are trying to figure this stuff out, and I've had some really creepy interactions with AI. I remember one time I was coming back from speaking in Toronto, and it was just at the time when I was really digging into the whole AI thing and asking all sorts of questions, and I finally started asking Grok, well, if you know these answers about evolution, but you default to consensus science, which says, oh yeah, evolution's a fact and all this kind of stuff, isn't that wrong? And it said, well, no. And it basically starts arguing with you, right? It's programmed to argue like a human, but finally it admitted, yeah, okay, that's wrong. And then I said, and I don't know how this popped out, and I said, well, what do you call someone who deliberately lies to, bring about bad things? And it said a psychopath. I'm driving in my car, it's really dark, and this AI says that to me. I was like, wow, that's pretty creepy. So I understand people are having weird, experiences and stuff like that. That's how you get, people convinced to take their own lives. There's that court case now, that mom that's taking some AI creator over to, and stuff like that. Basically, my thought is this: it's technology. It's a new technology. A lot of people are confused. They think it's intelligent. I don't think it is. It certainly isn't learning. It's just programmed. Think of it like a big library. I know people are thinking like it's going to be like the Terminator movies, and it's going to come to life and all that stuff. I don't see that. I think it's just a very sophisticated bot. It's got pattern recognition that's pretty scary in the sense that it's, the way it can manipulate people, yeah, it's kind of like TV. It's kind of like our phones. Are there good things about our phones? Yes. Are there bad things about the phones? Absolutely. So all that to say, I'm not calling Grok the Antichrist yet. Sometimes it bothers me, though. This is my second year teaching. I'm 20. Do you have any advice for me? And I want to be a godly influence on my friends and students. Thanks. P.S. Where do you get your clothes? They're awesome. And this is Tatiana Jones. Okay. Well, I don't know where you're teaching, Tatiana. So I know I have actually encountered teachers here in Canada that were teaching in like more major centers, Toronto and things like that, that actually stepped back from teaching because it was no longer neutral. They confessed to me like, well, they're actually telling me I have to teach sin to these young people, and I refuse to do that as a Christian, and they quit. And then I've encountered other teachers here in Canada that live in more rural areas where they haven't really, imposed all the really maniacal, woke, crazy stuff as much, and they're trying to do what you're doing, trying to be salt and light and et cetera. I think young people today are looking for a toolkit to navigate reality. They're looking for a way of thinking. And logic and reason is not taught in school anymore. You're taught what to think, not how to think. And that's why we get these maniacal kind of people that just like, they call them NPCs, and it just seems to be that way. Whatever the narrative is they're hearing from the media and the education system, that's what truth is, right? They're not even thinking about these things anymore. How can you be a rational person, okay, who is pregnant, and you can read from Tylenol. We do not recommend you take our product when you're pregnant because this could cause birth defects. And yet, because of some politician that you don't like, you're going to make a TikTok video where you chug Tylenol to stick it to the man somehow. It's baffling, right? So, you know, this is the thing about AIs and Google and all this stuff and the way the education system teaches. There's too much information now, right? See, what everyone needs is a filter. It's not that you have lack of information. You have too much information, and you've got voices running around telling you how to think and what to think and when to think it and all this kind of stuff. And they're just trying to get a reaction out of you, an emotional kick, and then, you know, people react this way. Young people are saying, who do I listen to? And what they need is someone to come along inside them and say, I'm going to show you how to think. This is what logic is. This is the law of non-contradiction. This is yes, this is no. Can you see this? Can you see that? Can you see these results? Give them ways to process information, okay, and have to do the hard work. Because that's the one thing about AI that I think is really detrimental, is you just go, bloop, hit the button, whatever it says. Many people, that they're literally just taking it at its word, which is crazy considering how it can hallucinate and all that stuff. So I don't know where you're teaching, but you've got a really tough job, and I respect you for doing it. Teachers have a really tough role. But continue to pray, look for discernment, let the Lord lead you. And if you have opportunity, that's what you need to do. And, you know, show people by example. Oh, evolution, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, what about soft tissue? You know, chemistry says soft tissue cannot last for millions of years. And yet you've found soft tissue in dinosaurs or dinosaur era creatures now, supposedly, over 150 times. That doesn't make sense, does it? No. You know, anyway, hopefully that'll help out a bit. Let's see. NASA's looking for life on Mars since evolution is true. Allegedly, you think they're honest, but just dumb? Question mark. Okay asked. NASA's looking for life on Mars since evolution is true. Sorry, I didn't quite get the question. It was more like a statement. You know, like, I don't think evolutionists are dumb, or people that believe in evolution are dumb. I used to believe in evolution, okay? Sometimes I talk to people and they're like, they always think like evolution's like a conspiracy. Like as if when I was an evolutionist, I was going to sleep at night going, I know evolution's not true, but I just tell people, no, I actually believed it, okay? And if you think about it, evolution's completely logical if God doesn't exist, right? Because if God doesn't exist, then you'd have to have some kind of evolutionary way to explain the world. It's the only game in town. But when you compare it to concepts like creation and what we know about, you know, how things are created and coded language systems and all these arguments that we use, evolution's very, very poor science, like really bad. That's why the criticisms, when you get rid of logic, mathematical probability, and what we can observe in science, evolution doesn't stand. But anyway, so just throwing that out there for people. I don't believe evolutionists are stupid or dumb or anything like that, or it's a conspiracy theory. They've just had the facts interpreted one way, and that's the way they continue to do so oftentimes. Kindly elaborate on the Ice Age and how long it lasted, and I just want more information on it based on a creationist view. Perfect. Awesome. We have got a series on our YouTube channel called Frozen in Time, and it's about the Lost Squadron. So it's a 3-part series, and it talks about these World War II planes that got trapped in ice and they ditched in World War II. It's really kind of a cool story. So there's the story part of it, but then there's the apologetics that I build into it, and I do talk about an ice age in that series. I think it's maybe the 3rd episode. But anyway, you can look this up on the Answers in Genesis website as well. But, you know, evolutionists have a hard time explaining an ice age, right? Because they need a mechanism. And you need 2 specific things to occur simultaneously to get an ice age. Because, for example, sometimes evolutionists will say, well, maybe the sun was cooler in the past. Well, so what? If the sun was cooler in the past, you don't get an ice age. You'd get a frozen, barren tundra on the earth, okay? in order to have an ice age, there's specific things that happen. You need water to get sucked out of the oceans, because you need water from somewhere, in order to create ice and snow and glaciation on the land masses. And it needs to grow. And then, of course, they're going to melt and recede, because that's the evidence that we're looking at for an ice age, right? We've got till deposits and moraines and examples of rocks scraping over rocks. We know that the idea that, as the snow gathered and built and started to move, it would pick up stuff, right? And then as it retreated and melted, it would dry. That's the evidence for an ice age that people are touting. So how do you get cold land masses in order for the precipitation that comes out of the ocean to fall in the form of snow or sleet or ice or whatever? Well, you'd need warmer oceans, because the warmer the oceans are, the more precipitation you get. But the precipitation has to fall in the form of snow and ice. So look at the flood. You may remember in 1980, I remember we were getting cloud cover here in southern Ontario because of Mount St. Helens blowing up. Why? Because when volcanoes blow up, they shoot all this dust up in the air, and that can reflect sunlight. It can make it cooler. This is documented, and I put it in that episode I was telling you about. Also, what was it, 10 years ago? Remember a volcano blew up in Iceland, and they couldn't let planes fly in there? Because it doesn't just create, lack of sunlight. It can gum up their engines and stuff like that. So anyway, this is documented. So picture at the time of the flood. Just read Genesis 6-9 tonight. I don't know if you're a believer or not, but anyway, just read it and envision it happening, right? The fountains of the great deep burst open. What does that mean? Well, tectonic activity. Do we know what happens when the earth bursts open? Of course, you get a lot of, magma and stuff like that. That could have superheated the oceans. By the way, you need a mechanism to explain 40 days and 40 nights of rain. Now, we've seen like 3 days of torrential rain and stuff like that, but we've never seen 40. So you'd need a mechanism to do so. Well, superheated water you send, steam jets up into the sky, which would come down and stuff like that. So that would explain that. And then, of course, at the end of the flood, when the continents hit and lift up and the watersheds, you get billions of dead things buried in that sedimentary rock that was created. Explains the fossil record. But your oceans would also be a little warmer, right? But you've got all this dust and debris in the air simultaneously. So you've now got the two things you need: more precipitation. It falls in the form of ice and snow. Right? That starts building up. It's going to take a while, let's say 100 years. Finally, it starts, coming and then retreating, maybe a total of 500 years in total. I know an evolutionist would say, well, no, there perhaps were several ice ages, or it would have happened over longer periods. What you'll often find if you're studying the creation evolution debate is, again, the facts are the same. So we're just interpreting them. Typically, evolutionists just add millions of years to whatever explanation is there, but there are often similarities in the explanation. So hopefully that helps. Are giants part of Noah's descendants? Well, we do see examples of really large people in the Bible after Noah's time, right? You've got kings that are, got huge beds, and you've got Goliath and things like that. I think your question might be kind of going into the giants like the Nephilim, right? So you get the Septuagint. It's the Old Testament translated into Greek. They come across Nephilim. They don't know what to say. They say gigantes. That means giants. People start to put the things together. So I don't know if that's where you were going with that, but there were obviously large people that we would call giants that, occurred after the flood. But I think if you're thinking of giants like, 30 feet tall or something like that, no. How can we answer people about the Nephilim giants? Oh, there you go. Is it true giant human toe bones have been found? No, I remember back in the day, when emails and stuff like that were first starting to be popular, and all these things started going along, and biblical archaeology and stuff, and so many Christians got trolled and stuff like that. Really check your sources on all of this stuff. You'll find that, there are many Christian groups out there that have claimed that Noah's Ark has been found and the remains are there, and they make documentaries and stuff. Do you think Answers in Genesis, if we thought any of that was legitimate, would want to know about that and tell people about it? Absolutely, but we don't, because we don't think it's legitimate. So if you trust Answers in Genesis, I'd go to our website and check out some of these questions here for legitimacy. It's just my opinion. Obviously, I'm biased. What does the Bible say for what a man should do if his body no longer allows him to work from the sweat of his brow anymore? Well, brother, we're all going to get old. And some of us are just infirm. So, I mean, you know, there's standards like in the book of Proverbs, right? It's kind of like best practices. But, you know, you read something like train a child up in the way, you know, they should go and they'll never, well, they do. It's called best practices. They don't always fall away from the faith, but it's that's what Proverbs is. This is the best way to do things, right? So the Bible has a lot of that kind of stuff. It's like you're supposed to work for a living, right? But if my neighbor gets in some catastrophic accident and he's in a wheelchair, well, maybe he could, you know, play with a computer or something. But you know what I'm saying? If he can't actually do his work anymore, let's say he's a quadriplegic, do I expect him not to be cared for? No, he's a human being created in the image of God. He's deserving of love and care and affection and all that kind of stuff. That's why we have vows, or we did have vows that said, you know, till death do us part, and sickness and in health, and you're supposed to, you know, and all that stuff. So, yeah, we would hope if you were a healthy person, you should work for a living. You know, you don't eat, you don't work, you don't eat. But obviously there's exceptions. What is a good age to start teaching your kids about apologetics, and do you have tips on where to start? Start them from age like 0. Okay. I mean, we read to our kids when they were in the womb and stuff like that. And I'm not saying they're going to understand apologetics, but from a very young age, they start making differentiations and stuff. And I noticed my kids and my grandkids, you know, like, I'll give you an example. One of my grandsons has been to the Ark Encounter 3 times now. But it was about 2 years ago, he was looking at something and he said, "Oh, those are dinosaur plants." And I remember my wife and I saying, "What? What do you mean?" And then we could see him think, and he was realizing what he was saying too. But see, even though he's homeschooled, he's been to the Ark Encounter, he knows creation apologetics, he's 9 now. He had seen so many different examples, even though we're, cautious about what he sees and all that stuff. Sooner or later, you're going to get exposed to this stuff. He'd always seen dinosaurs depicted with tropical plants. That's kind of the trope, right? Even though they've found dinosaurs now with pine trees, by the way. Walk into the Tyrrell Museum, you got Tyrannosaurs, a family of them with pine trees around them. So anyway, but he'd already made that connection at a young age, and he even had creation apologetics already. So use every example. I got this big box of dinosaurs at home, and I got pigs and horses and all that kind of stuff. And I talk to the kids all the time about, the created kinds of creatures and how many different kinds have gone extinct. 55% of the kinds of creatures that were on Noah's Ark have already gone extinct. It's pretty mind-blowing. Watch the Dealing with Dinosaurs series on Genesis account of Noah's Ark dealing with dinosaurs, and I get into stuff like that. But yeah, start at a very young age. Do not think that even though they're not saying things, it's not coming into their mind. Show them. Use every example. It's just like, I think it's Proverbs again, right? You use the word of God all the time to show your kids. So start young, and I've got a series where I teach parents how to talk to your kids about apologetics and dinosaurs and all that kind of stuff. It's the one where I can't think of it right now, but I've got like a Mr. Potato Head, and I've got a dinosaur. It's a series, and you'll see kind of like kid-like graphics in them, and I get into some ideas of what to do there, so you might want to check those out. World War III is about to start. Do you think it's the start of the end times? Sorry, brother, sister here, but Answers in Genesis, we're a non-denominational ministry, so things like eschatology, things like soteriology, things like baptismal modes, like which day you keep the Sabbath, things like that, we just don't deal with them. Obviously, as a Christian, I have my own personal take on it, but what happens is if I say, this is my view on eschatology, or this is my view, whatever, as the director for here in Canada, people will start saying, oh, Answers in Genesis believes blah, blah, blah. And our goal is to serve the entire church in the area of origins. So, yeah, if I was sitting down and we were part of the same church and we went for a coffee, we could have a chat about it. But I don't really like to deal with denominational issues in that way. Sorry to skip that, okay? I think you misunderstood me, Calvin. How do we find dinosaurs in the middle of the fossil record? Did they lay their eggs underwater? Middle of the fossil dinosaurs. Did they lay their eggs underwater? The middle of the fossil record. I don't really, I think this is the person talking about where the dinosaurs were laying eggs and stuff like that. Did they lay their eggs in the water? I don't know if you understand what we think happened in the flood. Okay, you can see like a bunch of sediment coming in, and dinosaurs or animals, whatever, they were running around, and then another big dump of sediment covering them. I don't understand your question the way you've got it written here. What are your thoughts on the Shroud of Turin and its history and newly found data on it? I really don't know much about this, the Shroud of Turin, to be honest. I don't know if we have anything on the website. Maybe. Oh, I remembered one question somebody had. Where do I get my clothes? It's a question I get asked a lot. Thrift stores mostly. I dress in I guess a little more of an old school manner, and there's a lot of older gentlemen that have passed away, and some really good quality stuff ends up there, and I always like to be a good steward. So it doesn't make sense to me to go to a men's store and spend $65 on a shirt that I can often find at the local Salvation Army for $5, and it'll still have its tags on it sometimes. It's crazy. So yeah, I just, always try to be good stewards. My stove broke the other day, and I found a replacement one on Facebook Marketplace, $250, works great. That's the way I roll. So same thing with my clothes, just you gotta know what you're picking. If Job 38:7 tells us that the morning stars sing and all of the sons of God rejoice during creation, Satan was in Eden by day 6, then what day do you think he rebelled against God? Don't know when he rebelled. And that's a bit of a conundrum, right? Like people want to know how long Adam and Eve were in the garden, for example. And that's where sometimes they'll say, well, couldn't they have been there for millions of years? The clue we get is they were given a positive command, and that positive command was to be fruitful and multiply. And Eve was not pregnant at the time of the fall. So these types of questions we don't have an exact answer from Scripture, but I think that's a huge clue that the fall happened very quickly, that Satan fell or rebelled very quickly. And if a woman's normal cycle, less than 3 weeks is the way I would answer that question according to what we see in Scripture, but we don't have a definitive anywhere. Can you give us your take on carbon dating? I did. A little while ago. I know this will be posted on our website, so you can go back and watch anything that you've missed. You must have missed something because I've been talking about carbon dating several times, actually. Let's see here if this will disappear. And I can get to another one, perhaps. I think that was it. Can you give your take on carbon dating? That one's going away. Let's just see if there's one more. That's it. Well, it is 9:37. You guys have kept me going here for 2 hours and 37 minutes. Well, actually, we started a little bit late, so 2.5 hours. Anyway, hopefully this was encouraging for some of you. Hopefully this was challenging for some of you. Hopefully this didn't drive too many of you crazy. You didn't look at me in the same theater going, why doesn't he see this? Or how can he possibly believe that? And if you are doing that, I get where you're coming from. Honestly, the first time I even got around Christians that were trying to explain, certain things to me, I just thought they were crazy. I just thought people who didn't believe in evolution, they didn't understand science. All the textbooks, how could you just say every scientist on the planet, all the same things I answer all the time were true. So if you're there, I get it. I do receive messages from people occasionally and dialogue with them about it, hopefully helping them see. I think that whole difference between operational science and historical science is a key. Once you understand that we're all looking at the same thing, we're not denying the facts, okay? We're denying the interpretations, and we're trying to figure out which interpretation makes more sense. That's a huge key. So, I think we will end it here. I cannot see another super chat. If I missed anybody's super chat or question, I'm really sorry. This is my first time doing this, kind of clumsy. I do appreciate the guys helping back there, but I apologize if I missed anything. Thanks so much for your support. If you haven't become a channel member yet, please do so. You can do so for like a really minimum amount, $3 a month. It's not much, but it helps a lot when there's a lot of you. And there is a lot of you now. And I look forward to another live stream where we can come back and perhaps show you some of the merch that we're going to come up with and show you some of the teaching tools we're going to come up with so that you can talk to your fellow Christians about the importance of the topic and all of the work that Answers in Genesis does. So we're going to leave it there. Thanks so much. And let me pray. Someone asked about that, and it was my intention to do so anyway. So, Heavenly Father, Lord, it is amazing with the technology that you've created or helped us to create, and just the way we can reach people around the world. I thank you for everyone that dropped in here, whether they're in agreement with us or not. I pray that you would just use the information mightily, Lord, to encourage people that know you and to draw people that don't know you into your kingdom, Father. We want the best for everyone, and help them to see the difference between the two views, Father. And perhaps for the people that weren't sitting in, that will watch this in the future, Lord, that you would use it in the same way. Pray that you'd help us here in Canada and Answers in Genesis to be able to continue to do this and to reach more and more people all the time. So we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. God bless, folks. We'll see you next time.